Hello, my name is Tiina. I am a legal counsel here at Cybernetica. First, as a really quick introduction about my background, I started as a privacy lawyer 20 years ago when Estonia was just had actually already kicked off this groundbreaking transformation into a digital society. And back then already we had to deal a lot with the question how to build as open a state as possible, but at the same time keep the individuals in there protected. I have experience from both from the regulator side and also from the private sector. And now I'm really happy to continue dealing with my favorite topics here at Cybernetica. As Adela just said, we are discussing the interoperability topic, and within this context, we would first like to focus on privacy as one of the starting points or points of departure for building interoperability systems and data exchange systems. So in the following 10 minutes or so, we will briefly explain how and why we think that it is so important. So first we will take a look at the preconditions for ensuring privacy, and later on we will discuss also the benefits that we think ensuring privacy provides. To start with the preconditions, I think it's first maybe important to briefly focus on the term privacy, because privacy is by no means a clearly defined notion with very clear boundaries. It changes over time, it changes dependent on where you are, who you are. For example, what is private for an 80-year-old may not be private for their teenager, TikToker grandchild. Also, people's habits are changing. The technologies that we are using, they are constantly changing. So from that perspective, doing such a privacy analysis is definitely a challenging job. Nevertheless, we think that regardless of where you are, there are certain building blocks or preconditions that always need to be analyzed when building privacy-ready interoperability systems. So first, let's start with this concept that privacy is contextual. In order to build your data processing systems in a privacy-enhancing way, you have to analyze the context of your data processing. And this has to happen from both the legal side and also from the technical side. Now, focusing more on the legal side for a moment, it's fair to say that the right to privacy is considered a fundamental right in almost all corners of the world. Having said that, we need to also keep in mind that we always need to take into consideration the local culture, the historical background of a specific region or society, the level of technology that is being used there, and so on. So it is very context-specific what is meant under privacy and how to protect it. Just to give one example here, maybe in the context of interoperability, it may be interesting to know that, for example, in Europe, in Germany, the Germans are very cautious about creating one universal national code because of, at least partly because of historical background, and that has made the issue of numbering people very sensitive there. These kind of state-specific background data always needs to be taken into account when designing data exchange solutions. In the EU, privacy has a well-established place as a fundamental right, but also the right to data protection has actually achieved an independent fundamental right position alongside privacy. But that is definitely not the only way to approach to protecting or restricting the processing of data. In some other regions, privacy may not be a fundamental or a constitutional right, but restrictions to how you can handle data may be based more on the right to or the data ownership factors, or things like trade secrets or intellectual property. And the US is definitely here one very well-known example. In the US, it is not a constitutional right. There is no constitutional right to privacy. But the restrictions to data processing are more based on the maybe the economic value of data and data ownership issues. At the same time, it is very interesting to see the developments in the US over the past years. It feels that there is a strong push for developing privacy regulations also there. So again, as we see, the landscape is shifting, and actually the businesses need to keep up. Secondly, privacy is always use case specific. So you have to take into account where will your system be used, and how this can be built, taking into account what is in that particular situation. What is the area of business that you are operating in? Is it healthcare or banking or public administration, for example? This already differentiates the use cases a lot. And now when we look at this in a bit more detailed way, then we see that there are always at least these three questions that need to be answered. So first, why do you need to process the data? Secondly, which data do you have and which data do you need to achieve your purposes? And thirdly, who is processing the data? So who are the controllers, who are the processors of the data, and whom you need to share the data with? Here, and actually it is interesting to note that these questions are relevant for both on the legal side, but also from the technical side. So whenever you set up or set out to build a new information system, for example, which involves data processing, then I'm sure these questions need also answers from the technical perspective or business perspective. And also when talking about use case analysis, I would briefly like to touch upon the question of a legal basis for processing someone's data. It may be based on a privacy concern or the need to protect someone's privacy, or, for example, for the purpose of protecting business secrets or intellectual property. When you look at different privacy policies of different service providers and based on the visible rhetorics, you could often presume that consent is the most widely used basis for using someone's data. But at least in Europe, but also I suppose in other parts of the world, it is very often that data processing is legitimized by some other legal grounds. For example, that you need to fulfill some kind of a public function, or you need the data to deliver some services. And that is particularly the case in civil rights societies, the continental law societies, where lots of data processing goes on without asking from the customer. Now moving on to the third building block. Of course, the data efficiency comes into play. You have, for business purposes, you need to know your data. You need to clean it up in order to support the purposes that you need it, and also you must adjust to different needs to share the data with some third parties, for example, or use it for different purposes internally. While this makes sense already from the business perspectives, and when you are already analyzing these things or doing these things, then actually you have already implemented privacy by design principle, which is one of the underlying data protection principles. You have already then achieved things like data minimization, protecting the rights of the customer. For example, when you make sure that you are able to update the data on an ongoing basis. Last but not least, privacy heavily relies on security. So security definitely is a precondition for making sure that the data is kept private, and particularly in service business. You need the trust of your customers, but also governments need the trust of their citizens and nationals. So even I would say that maybe technologies and new IT solutions in a way enable better ways to build trust, because for example, when you hand over some paper document, then it is very difficult to check who has had access to it. But when you are using systems where you can, for example, where you keep logs and you can demonstrate either to the regulators or to the data subject how your data has been used and who has accessed it, then this definitely helps to create trust. And here we have brought one pretty sad example, actually, from European experience, where lack of security has actually ended up with bankruptcy of an enterprise. It was a psychotherapy center in Finland who was subject to a very serious cyber attack. And first it blocked their work. Then they had, of course, compliance issues and the financial damage and litigation costs, of course, took their toll. So eventually it ended up with the bankruptcy of that company. So these things happen. And just to recap, so the preconditions are: you need to know the context of data processing. You need to take a very deep look at the use case. You probably want to aim for as efficient data strategy as possible, and you want to make your data systems secure. Now, looking at that, it looks like privacy is a pretty hard task to complete. But we still think that there are significant benefits for doing it. First, definitely when building privacy-ready interoperability systems, this helps to build trust. For example, you may remember from already 3 or 4 years ago the case of Roomba. They were producing those cute little vacuum cleaners. but they got caught in a massive privacy scandal because they were not, at least initially, they were not paying too much attention for respecting the customer's privacy. And this ended up in headlines in major newspapers, something like your cute little vacuum cleaner turns into a creepy little spy or something like that. So that's definitely a way to lose trust. And of course, there are numerous cases all over the world which have even led to bankruptcies of companies who have not taken privacy seriously. And also, it is interesting to see like how all over the world privacy regulations are being developed, and I think that this definitely signals that attitudes in the society are changing. Privacy is more and more important to people, and this lifts the topic also on the agenda of politicians. Then a second very important benefit of dealing with privacy that we see is, and what we are really excited about here at Cybernetica, is that using privacy-enhancing technologies may enable new business models. And for example, using encrypted data analysis tools, you may be eventually able to get access to data that initially wasn't available to you. And here we are really excited about our very recent project, which we did together with the European Commission. We have provided the link so that you can read more about it. But essentially, we managed to help mobile service user data be shared with statistical authorities without the statistical authorities actually getting access to the data itself. And finally, interoperability as one of the very big benefits of dealing with privacy. Here we have one example to bring from Europe again. In Europe, we are dealing with, there are several initiatives for cross-border data sharing. And one achievement is that there is a pan-European project actually to enable cross-border digital prescriptions. So when you're traveling, you can access your prescriptions and buy the medicine in another country. And currently it is already functioning between Estonia, Finland and Croatia, but hopefully this will go further and cover at least the European Union in the future. So here is once more a little recap. So we really think that why privacy is at the core of our solutions is that it increases credibility. It enables new ways of using data, and it definitely contributes to interoperability projects. With that, I would like to conclude. My colleagues now will shed some more light on how exactly we have implemented these principles and what our systems do. So thank you very much.